Good afternoon. This is Sam Vaughn for Sam Sports Report. We're going to start with Bob Huggins and then transition into KU, possibly the Rays story, and for sure go to the NBA. There's no way Bob Huggins and go to NFL scheduling for the Chiefs and Bears. There is no way Bob Huggins can still be a basketball coach. Whatever you think, it was not okay. And I know donating $1 million to a charity show is great. Is great, but basketball, this shows you're above the rules. On 8-10, he can donate another $1 million and do whatever the hell he has to do to make him a good citizen and go through classes, whatever, to avoid possibly a jail sentence. I mean, that's kind of what may happen if one of us says that. I heard this suggestion on radio, and if I did something like this, especially somebody ahead of a company, you would be fired. However, because it's Bob Huggins and he's a basketball coach and he's the CEO of a university and he's a legend, he's not fired. There's no question in my mind he would be fired. Or even how would he recruit a black player or a gay player or a transgender player? This is in our country, is a state. This is why our country is in a state I have long given up on and long given up understanding. Here's Gary Parrish, the announcer of college basketball. I would consider him an expert, but please realize I don't agree with everything he says.
News yesterday. I texted you with this. I was shocked when I heard the audio. I heard it and I thought it was going to be, an F word you don't say on the radio, but had a CK in it, not a G in it. It ends up being a homophobic slur that he uses twice. I was, like I said, shocked by this, and I'm a little bit surprised at how whatever ramifications are going to come from it have yet to come to fruition. What was your reaction first when you heard it?
I first wondered if it was real. And I didn't comment on it initially, and most college basketball people didn't either. And I don't want to speak for anybody else, but for me, because I started getting fans tweeting me like, oh, I guess you're just going to ignore this Bob Huggins thing. And I wasn't ignoring anything as much as I didn't know it was real. Bob Huggins has been talking publicly for 40 years. He understands you can't just go on radio and say that word without severe consequences. So is this real, or is this a Bob Huggins impersonator getting over on some Cincinnati radio guys? Because that kind of stuff does happen in our industry. How did this happen? Why did this happen? And it's not as simple as to, because, people love, Twitter's a great place for people to be smart alecky. People say, oh, well, I'll tell you how it happened. He's a homophobe. Well, that's not how it happened. That might be the root of it. But even if Bob Huggins were a homophobe, and let me be clear, I'm not labeling him that way. I'm just for the sake of the conversation. Even if he were, he knows he can't say that word on live radio, right? So I think you have to immediately rule out the most obvious thing, which is that a clear-minded Bob Huggins knowingly said that word twice on live radio. That did not happen. That's not what happened here. So the question becomes, well, then what happened? And here, from my perspective, it's got to be one of two things. One, he had been drinking, and he got a little loose, and he let some words fly out. That's one possible explanation. Not an excuse, but an explanation. The other one, and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about here, and I'll be interested to know whether you agree or disagree. The other explanation is that he literally didn't know he was on the air. Sometimes, even you and I do this. Before you start a live spot, you might be in a break, and you might talk to your guest. Hey, let me ask you one thing before we go on. You ask me a question, I'll answer it. Ask me a question. I have had these feelings, not with you, but with other people. Like the host starts talking to me before we're back from break, and then the host asks what seems like a perfect question for the radio show, and I'm like, are we on air now, or are we still off air? I'm genuinely confused. So then I just try to play it as if we are on air. And I wonder if Bob Huggins in that moment, thought he was just talking to two old friends off air, as opposed to doing a radio interview on air. Because I can't come up with another explanation for how this happened. He was either drinking, or he either didn't know he was on air, and of course it could possibly be both. But the idea that he just went on live radio, clear-minded, and intentionally, casually said those words the way he said them, that's just, the guy's not a dummy. He's been talking publicly for 40 years, never had anything like this happen. Alternative explanation for it, and it's got to be tied to drinking and or he simply did not know he was on the radio.
And I agree. We're talking to Gary Parrish here in the program. However, or they don't want to fire him.
I think convincingly argue both sides. Like I saw Dan Wolken from USA Today tweet last night the following. He said, if you were the CEO of any major American company, Coca-Cola, Anheuser-Busch, Nike, Disney, whatever, and you went on live radio yesterday and you said those words exactly the way, with the same context that Bob Huggins said them, you would be forced to resign. And I think that's probably true. When you frame it that way, and what Wolken added was, if you'll agree that the head of any company would be fired for this, why is it a question about whether Bob Huggins should be fired for this? And when you frame it like that, I get it. But on the other hand, Chris Beard allegedly beat up a woman less than a year ago, and he's now the head coach at the University of Mississippi. So are we really at a place where saying a word will end your career, but allegedly beating a woman? Yeah, it might cost you the job you had, but it quite clearly won't prevent you from getting another one. Are we at a point as a society, where saying that word is worse than allegedly beating a woman? I don't know what the answer to that question is. I'll let anybody listening answer it, however they see fit. Was the head of a company and did this, would be fired. The other side of it would be, this man is an icon in West Virginia who, said something he shouldn't have said, but let's not blow up his entire career over one really terrible radio interview. I'm willing to listen to both sides today.
I'm reprehensible and unexcusable. I'm with you. I'm glad I don't have to make the decision, but I think at the end of the day, my decision would be to fire him, because I think you need to make a statement. Because if I think about it, and you don't fire him, if next it's a racial slur or it's an anti-Semitic slur, not from Bob Huggins, but from somebody else within your school, now they have grounds to say, well, you can't fire me. Bob Huggins wasn't fired. That is now set. That's the scary part, right? And maybe that administrators are not thinking about, and by that I mean presidents that are allowing athletic directors to make these hires or make these decisions. We're mistake, got it. Here's what many people call a slap on the wrist, and let's get back to winning basketball games. It's there's no way that it can be put any other way, right?
Because it is tough. You're either bringing back a man who used a homophobic slur live on radio, or you are firing an icon of your state and university.
Won the game 4-3 in extras as Freddie Fermin hits a walk-off bunt single from third base to home on a shocking play. But it couldn't have been a better bunt. Royals win 4-3. Cubs and Cardinals are off. Force a Game 7. At home, Philadelphia Sixers will now have to go back on the road. Best of 7. Marcus Smart goes for 22 in the MVP. Joel Embiid goes for 26. Not enough. The Sixers and Celtics will play Game 7 in Boston. I'll tell you the stats for that game. But this game is TBD on Sunday. The Nuggets take the series from the Suns 4-2. Was the first season a success for Kevin Durant and the Suns, or was it a failure? Nikola Jokic had 32 and Cameron Payne had 31. 125-120 was your final. The game for tonight is a Knicks and Suns. Players to watch out for: Miami Heat, Jimmy Butler, and Julius Randle. The Knicks are on the brinks of elimination. Heat are favored by 6.5. Game time is at 6. The Lakers will play the Warriors. Lakers need to win to not have to go back on the road because you don't want those stats for Game 7. We'll wrap it up. This will be the wrap up. Game time is at 9. 2.5 is the line. This is Sam Vaughn for Sam Sports Report.